Hi everyone, this is Vicky, and I have Angelene with me right here.
Hello.
Let's just take a deep breath.
Just breathe.
And before we start, can you please introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi, I'm Jivananda Das. I live in an ashram in Maui, Hawaii, doing like Bhakti Yoga and devotional service, and I'm happy to be here.
Oh, perfect. So like the last time we talked, you said you were going to India. How was that?
Oh, it was a magical experience. It was really beautiful to see like people really embodying practices that are like thousands of years old and seeing like the results of those practices, you know, like how it affects people.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, it was a really positive experience regardless of the coronavirus outbreak happening while I was there.
Right. I thought you were really stuck in one place, huh?
Yeah, but you know what? Like there, they didn't really react in a kind of like big fearful way. Like people were very centered and calm, you know.
Okay.
That's awesome.
Just for the viewers, what is your religion?
I wouldn't really like call my belief system necessarily a religion.
Okay.
But what I practice is Bhakti Yoga, which is the yoga of devotion and the yoga of loving all things. And, you know, normally whenever we hear the word yoga in our Western society, you know, we immediately think of like, you know, getting stretchy, like asana yoga, like yoga positions and, you know, this kind of marketed yoga that we have in the West. But yoga, in its Sanskrit definition, just means union, to become one with the divine, right?
Mm-hmm.
And asana yoga is part of this yogic process. The stretchy kind yoga is that's probably the easiest way to say it in English. The stretchy yoga is it's a big it's one of the 8 limbs of yoga, and Bhakti yoga is also one of those limbs. And Bhakti is more of a mental yoga. It's more of a
Bhakti?
Bhakti.
Oh, okay.
Bhakti yoga. It's more of a frame of consciousness, and it's really a consciousness of accepting everything and everybody as part and parcel of the divine like God and divine goddess, like the feminine and masculine, accepting everything as a part and parcel of that, like even the most minuscule creature to like, you know, everybody, all being a part of that, and through that lens, like developing love and compassion for all things, you know.
Is that through movement? Is it through meditation? Is it through quiet time? What is...
Yeah, the main practice of Bhakti Yoga is mantra meditation. It's chanting. Doing kirtan is one of the forms, and also doing japa. Kirtan is, I'm sure some people out there listening have been to a kirtan before. It's like a devotional, like jam session. Pretty much like a bunch of instruments are there, and you're chanting these holy names, these like transcendental sound vibrations, which are like an invocation for bringing in divine energy and divine consciousness into your being. You know, the mantra that we chant in Bhakti Yoga. I mean, there's lots of practitioners of Bhakti Yoga of all different kinds of flavors, but me myself, I am personally very involved in Krishna consciousness. This is the form of Bhakti that I practice at the ashram I live. So we chant the Maha Mantra. The Hare Krishna Maha Mantra is Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. And these are names. These are very sacred and powerful names of the divine feminine and the divine masculine together. And you know, so the main practice is mantra meditation. You know, we chant these mantras on prayer beads throughout the day, and we also chant these mantras in song and dance. You know, so really the main practice of Bhakti Yoga is singing songs, dancing, celebrating, all like relishing within these sacred sound vibrations.
Wonderful. Could you pronounce your name for me?
Yeah, Jivananda.
Jivananda. Okay, Jivananda. So you referred to the divine feminine, the divine masculine. Do you believe these to be gods that you have to like give access into your spirit, or do they all reside in every spirit, in every bodily form?
I don't really think it's like a have to do anything kind of thing. I mean, the divine masculine, divine feminine is, you know, God and goddess, whatever name you want to put onto that, certainly already exists in all things, you know? So, I mean, that's at least what we acknowledge through this philosophy, that everything, everybody, every living creature, every inanimate object, everything that you can perceive and not perceive, everything that's inconceivable even, is a part and parcel of this supreme being that, you know, has many names and many forms. You know, it's not just limited to Krishna or Radharani. You know, it could be any form of God or goddess that resonates, you know, with the person, you know.
So it's open to interpretation.
Well, yeah, I mean, it just depends if you like take a more orthodox approach. You know, people that are like a little bit more orthodox would, you know, like lean towards like, you know, worshiping primarily like Krishna and Radharani, and but the philosophy definitely has space for all types of individuals. You know, like Krishna consciousness isn't some religion where we're like trying to get people to, you know, join like you gotta like, you know, dress this certain way or have your hair cut this certain way. You know, this isn't the goal of Krishna consciousness. The goal of Krishna consciousness is to become realized beings, you know? And everybody has their own process of realizations, you know? And becoming realized, what does that mean? That just means, you know, coming to a place of understanding that you're constantly surrounded by divinity all the time. In fact, it lives in your heart right there, you know? And the first principle of all yoga practices is that we are not this body. That in fact we are a spirit soul that is part and parcel of the divine, that's merely inhabiting this body for the time being. And why are we inhabiting this body? So that we can be in loving devotional service to this supreme entity, whatever it is to you, you know? Devotional service is the one of the big keys to enlightenment through this philosophy.
So do you feel like through the guidelines and through the parameters of your, I guess, you didn't really call it religion, so what would you refer to as your following?
I would refer to it as a state of consciousness.
Okay.
Really. Yeah, it's really just, it's a striving to achieve a state of consciousness through chanting transcendental sound vibrations, through developing a personal relationship with the divine. You know, like I'm using a very vague term to describe God and Goddess right now because, you know, I want everyone out there to be able to relate to whatever their interpretation of that is, you know. But really, it's a very personal philosophy, you know, and it's very much encouraged to develop a relationship with the divine, you know, because the divine isn't just simply like empty space or, you know, like something that's like limited to one form or another form. Like the divine is absolutely unlimited in all ways. Like God and Goddess can take form as the atoms in every molecule. God can take place as the planets. God can live inside of your heart. God can be the air around you as you breathe. It could be a stone. It could be a statue. You know, really, what you perceive to be the divine is the divine. And this philosophy tries to get us to perceive everything as part and parcel of that divinity.
That's beautiful. What sort of like, what consoled you to join this state of mind? Like, what was your first experience? How did you hear about it?
Well, I'm a musician, and I was a folk musician for a very long time, and I had a great interest in worldly music that had been passed down through oral tradition. Like, it's just like something that always fascinated me. And I always really enjoyed learning songs from different countries and different cultures that were like, you know, traditional songs or like just songs that have been passed down like for generations through word of mouth, like before we had recordings and stuff. I was always fascinated by that. And then one day someone was like, hey man, have you ever heard this? This is kirtan. This is, the oldest folk music on the planet Earth. This has been passed down for like 10,000 years, this style of music. And I was like, wow, that's really interesting. And of course it was originating out of India. So I started diving into lots of kirtan music, which, almost always involves chanting of the names of a particular incarnation of God. If I'm sure that you've heard people chant Ganesh mantras and Lakshmi mantras and things like this, like Shiva and Krishna and Vishnu and these kind of mantras.
Yeah.
So I just started developing an attraction for that sort of vibration through just playing the music. And then, it wasn't until I moved to Hawaii and I started positioning myself around this ashram that would have a kirtan once a week, and they would serve a big meal afterwards. And to be quite honest, the meal was quite attractive for me. I was living in a van at the time, which is a very normal thing in Hawaii. I'm sure like some places that's kind of weird, but in Hawaii, a lot of people live in their vans. And I was attracted to it. I really, I liked what it did to me. Like just simply the vibration, just chanting it, brought a sense of peace within me, And before you know it, it's a really long story, but I got really close with the Baba, or the minister who was at this temple. And, eventually I became his student and started practicing Bhakti Yoga.
Do you know what's so interesting is through my studies of different cultures and religions, the word Baba, it's found in several languages and different religions, and they refer to even their god. They call him Baba or her Baba, and
right.
I thought that one was also very interesting, and that's a fun fact.
Yeah, and the word Baba in Sanskrit, it literally translates to the
father,
word father.
Right?
Yeah,
father.
And this kind of brings us back to developing a relationship with the divine, right? When some people refer to their worshipable Lord as Baba, then they're considering themselves to be in a father son or father daughter relationship with the divine, because we can have many relationships. We can have many relations with the divine. It's not just it's all a personal thing. It's all it's not limited to what one person tells you or how one person experiences the divine. You could experience God and Goddess as your dear friend who's always there joking with you, or watching your back, or you can experience it as your father or your mother and feel that kind of nurturing energy from the divine, they're taking care of you. You can even love the divine like you're the divine's father, you're the divine's mother, as if it's your baby child, and you love God so much and you just want to take care of God all the time, or you can even go so far as to considering God and Goddess to be your conjugal lover, which of course is kind of a different thing than our material conjugal love, with our lustful interactions and these things. It's a bit different when you're, feeling that kind of way for the divine, because obviously there's no sort of material lust happening there. It's more of just being deeply in love with God and Goddess,
I appreciate that you bring the same amount of attention to God and also Goddess, and so the feminine and the masculine.
Yes. Well, that's a big part of the philosophy, at least in Krishna consciousness, because like I was saying earlier, God, I'm just going to say God for right now, but God is not limited to just one form or another form. So certainly, God's not just limited to a gender, So I try and emphasize that God and Goddess just to make it more relatable, and some people resonate more with the masculine side, some people resonate more with the feminine side, and that's okay. But in this philosophy, it's both sides are equally as important, and they're represented by a particular god and goddess, which is Krishna and Radharani. I'm sure you've probably heard of Krishna. Radharani's kind of a little bit more like not so mainstream, I suppose, to people outside of the ashrams and temples and stuff. But like it's the divine masculine and the divine feminine, which are the same. They're part and parcel of each other. Like God is in the shape of a man and a woman. You know, God, so it absolutely is always God and always goddess. You know, and it's like one represents like this supreme being, and the other one represents the potency, the power of the supreme being. So it's like you can't have one without the other. You know, the supreme being wouldn't be a supreme being without its potency, and vice versa. You know, the potency would just be nothing without the direction of the potency. You know, but.
Yeah, go
that's
ahead.
a bit deep. That's a bit getting in deep. You know?
We're ready for it. All of it. However deep you want to go. You want to talk about energies and atoms and molecular levels? Go ahead, do it.
Sure. I mean,
right, Vicky? We're a little weird.
That's the simplified version. Is that the divine feminine represents the potency of the Lord? You know, the divine feminine is the potency of that. Like. So all things are done through the goddess. All things that manifest are done through the goddess. And, you know, the supreme being, like Krishna, he represents, like, the all-powerfulness of it all, you know? But even though, and you know, we relish in these pastimes because we have ancient scriptures that we subscribe to that are called the Vedas. It's all Vedic literature. And these Vedas, you know, scientists have dated them back 10,000 years. But, you know, within the philosophy, we have faith that these scriptures are timeless. You know, we don't really, you know, put a number on it because it's, you know, the instructions of like great sages and gods and goddesses and that have compiled into this literature over a long period of time. You know, like eons. And in this Vedic philosophy, it talks heavily about how there's stories. There's like these relatable stories of like when different incarnations of God and Goddess had like walked upon the earth, you know, and a part in the stories surrounding Lord Krishna and Radharani is Lord Krishna was this like, you know, the god of love and was absolutely like a playful rascal who did a lot of things that you wouldn't expect an incarnation of God to do. But he was just doing those things simply because he was a playful incarnation. But one of the pastimes is like, you know, there's many demons that like threatened the village that he was residing in, right? And he had to like, you know, fight these demons to protect the villagers. So it was like showing the power of God. Like, wow, look at God. He's so powerful. He could defeat these like great demons, with so easily, just barely by lifting his hand. But then, at the same time, whenever the divine feminine, who's Srimati Radharani, if she would just look at him with one sidelong glance, he was completely powerless. Whatever she needed, he would bend to her will, you know? So through those stories, it helps relate to us, like, the importance of, like, okay, like, God is very strong and all-powerful, but would be absolutely nothing without his potency, without the goddess energy, you know? So we don't limit God to just a masculine form or just a feminine form, you know? And because, you know, all of these, and that brings us back to like the first principle of yoga. The first principle of yoga is that we are not these bodies, you know? I am not a man, I am not a woman, I am not pretty, I am not ugly, I am not gay, straight, black, white, Jewish, Christian, Hindu. I'm none of these things. All of these things are simply false ego bodily identifications, which in all problems in the world stimulate from these sort of identifications, being like, oh, you know, I'm this and they're that. Us,
exactly.
them,
yes.
You know?
I love that.
Yes.
So, like, we accept the fact that, in fact, we are all spirit souls. You know, we are all on that same level, that same platform. You know, this isn't an exclusive thing to anybody. This philosophy is free of caste, free of creed, free of all these things that limit people and, you know, create these conflicts amongst, you know, the human race. And so that's like one of the big driving factors between our desire to become realized, Like we want to be free of that kind of material bondage, And we consider even the simplest thing like saying I'm a man or I'm a woman, we consider that to be a part of our ego, that identification, because the Vedic literature, clearly states to us that we are not these bodies. We are a soul that jumps in and out of bodies the same way you take off old garments and put on new garments. And it's really a philosophy of acceptance, because you see, because like that just coming to that understanding, if you have that realization, and everybody needs to have their realizations on their own time, like there's no pushing this philosophy on people. Either they resonate or they don't, but when you have that realization, it just strips away any sort of fear revolving around death or like the uncertainty of what's going to happen to your soul or all these things. It really strips away those kind of things. And what is the most dangerous type of fear? The most dangerous type of fear is like what's going to happen when I die, or am I going to be alone?
Yes, I wanted to ask you that. Like, since you brought that up, what would you like? What do you believe in your state of mind?
It will elaborate the question a little bit more.
About the afterlife.
Well, I mean, so through Vedic knowledge, it's like indicated that we take many births. We take 8 million births in 8 million different species before we even become a human being one time. So we take very many births, and we're going to continue to keep taking these births until we become fully realized beings, until we become completely God and Goddess conscious. When we become, like, the whole point of taking these incarnations is to remember where we came from, is to remember God, remember Goddess, and return back to God and Goddess. Because in this philosophy, it really, what really determines what body you're taking in the next life is your karma and the state of mind you are in upon leaving your body. If you are in a complete remembrance of God and Goddess, whatever that means to you, when you're leaving your body, then that is the place that you go. But it is very difficult to remember the divine upon the moment of death, because our bodies are so focused on not dying. Our mind is so focused on how do I get out of this, or oh, I'm terrified, or oh, I wish I could see this person again, or oh, our mind goes to all these places rather than just being in that peaceful place of like, I'm not alone. I'm here with Krishna right now. I'm here with Radharani right now, and that's where I'm going. So we also believe that all the spiritual advancement that you make is carried from lifetime to lifetime to lifetime to lifetime. So this entire life, like living it in a spiritual way, it will never be wasted. Even if you make just the smallest of advancement, the smallest of realizations, it will carry on with you into the next life, and the next life, and the next life, and the next life. So with that philosophy, it just eliminates that sort of fear of death, knowing that it's just as simple as taking off garments and putting on new garments, And
hey, Javar, I don't want to butcher it. Can you say your name again?
Jivananda.
Ghevananda?
Yes.
Jivananda.
Yes.
Ghevananda. Okay. Ghevananda. So, I have a question for you, actually. Like, how long would you say approximately did it take you to come to this sort of like understanding of everything that you believe in finally?
Well, I want to be clear that, like, me, I am not an advanced spiritual person. I am not some sort of realized being. I am not some sort of anyone who's like qualified to be teaching or anything of this nature. I just accept, that, the divine put me in this situation to be speaking about this, and so like it is my duty to speak about this, like in this moment, but me personally, like I am not any sort of high up being at all, like for me, like, I'm still in the very beginning stages of this philosophy, you know? I mean, I've already gone through I've already been, like, initiated through Vedic rituals and ceremonies, and I've been engaging in worship for a couple of years, and I do devotional service as, like, my main thing that I do in my life around a temple. You know, I help keep a temple together, like a temple guardian of sorts, you know, and I took a pilgrimage to India because that is what my guru instructed me to do, and you know, I've had my experiences there, which were definitely, like, I've had some realizations, but like, there are, like, one of the things I experienced in India is that there are people who have been practicing this philosophy for, like, their whole lives or for generations, and these people are truly realized. Like, that's what it looks like. Like, they're in absolute bliss all the time, completely entranced in, like, the love of divine, of just, like, their eyes, like, I don't know if you've ever seen someone, like, looked into someone's eyes who was, like, on psychedelics before, you know, but that's what their eyes look like, in a completely sober state of mind, you know, and even though they're in a completely sober state of mind, they appear to be madmen and madwomen, just completely head over heels in love with God and with Goddess, you know, would do anything for them, you know, and it's a really beautiful thing to see, like that, it was really assuring for me, and it was also very humbling for me, because it's very easy for our egos to be like, oh, look at me now, like, I have this philosophy and I am doing my practice, like, da 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 da, you know, like, these are still parts of our false ego, you know.
Yeah.
It's one of the things that Lord Krishna said, it was actually one of his incarnations, Lord Chaitanya, in the Shishastakam, which is 8 verses. It's like the Vedas condensed into just 8 verses by one of the incarnations of the Supreme Lord. And what he said was, one should be as humble as a blade of grass, as tolerant as a tree.
I've heard this.
Void of all sense of false prestige, ready to offer respects unto anyone and expecting none in return. In this state of mind, one can chant the holy names of the Lord constantly. So, with that being said, you know, we've received instruction that, you know, to make spiritual advancement, we need to humble ourselves. We need to put ourselves in a place where, you know, even if someone insults you, or even if, like, you know, these things happen, we must remain tolerant, you know, and we must not seek after this false prestige, like, oh, like, I want followers, you know. No. This is spiritual suicide, you know. Like, if you are an advanced being who is attracting people to, like, become more realized, that is something that will happen absolutely organically, you know. And even then, the really, really advanced, like, beings will just turn them away. They'll be like, nope. Like, are you familiar with Ram Dass at all, and his story with Ram Dass?
I'm slightly. I took a course on Middle Eastern culture, and Ram Dass was mentioned. I had to do a chapter reading about him.
Well, his guru was Neem Karoli Baba, who was certainly,
yes,
like a saint, like a Rasic saint, who was living in India. And after Ram Dass wrote his book, Be Here Now, and published it, all these people were flocking to Neem Karoli Baba's ashram so that they could become his student. And literally 99% of the people who arrived, they looked at him, he looked right at them and told them to leave. Just said leave, you know? Wow. And they went through this whole crazy journey to get there, all this, and he was just like, no, I'm not going to teach you, you know? Okay. Like, this is him trying to avoid, this is him trying to protect his state of humbleness, you know? Mm-hmm. Because if you see something that feeds your ego and you subscribe to this philosophy, you try to avoid it, you know? Because, like, ego is the main thing that's standing in between us and God. Ego is what's telling us, hey, like, you know, we're this body, we're, you know, like, when we die, we're nothing, you know? That's all ego speaking, you know? So, you know, we try to avoid these things. But there has been really great saints that have existed and walked the earth that have taken on many disciples and have spread this philosophy. You know, those kind of people we consider to be pure devotees. And that simply means that everything that they do, every action that they make in their life was to serve the divine. Which is a very difficult thing to do, because we're constantly trying to serve ourselves. You know, like, what are we serving all the time? Like, oh, I need to serve my stomach. My stomach is hungry. I need to eat. Or, oh, I need to serve, my sex desires. Or, oh, I need to serve this or that. You know, we're constantly trying to serve all of these things, and ultimately, the thing that you can serve forever, from lifetime to lifetime, and that will always satiate you 100%. All these other things, they're just temporarily satiating, like temporarily satisfying. Like, you eat, you'll get hungry again.
Exactly.
You have sex, you'll want to have sex again, or whatever. I'm just using that as an example. But all of these things have a saturation point, right? Like, eventually you're like, oh, I've eaten too much. I can't eat anymore. Like, I'm done enjoying my food. And then it's like, or like the same with like sex life, like you can only have like, your yayas for so long, and then eventually it starts to become mundane, right? So it's like, this is the thing that never becomes mundane. This is the infinite reservoir of pleasure. And it comes from the divine and serving the divine. That is, the essence of the philosophy.
Yes, and totally off subject, sort of like another way to understand it, through personal training, we are taught about to be satiable, to have that like insatiable desire to eat, and you want to eat and eat and eat. So through personal training and like nutritional facts and dietitians and things like that, if you go through one, they all teach you to transfer that sort of energy into a more positive outlet, a more positive habit or behavior. So in a sense, it's sort of like the same feeling, just transferred into like a different state of mind, sort of.
Right. It's all in the mind. That's ultimately what it is. You're still doing all the things that you normally do, but you're doing it with the consciousness of like, okay, I'm serving the divine through this action. Like, and like you brought up food. Like, of course we all need to nourish our bodies and maintain a healthy state of body. If we want to continue serving the Lord in this body, we got to maintain the body. So how in this philosophy we do something called, we eat food that is called prasad. This is a Sanskrit word, prasad. Prasad, it literally translates to mercy, the mercy of the Lord. And how we go about preparing prasadam is whenever you're cooking this food, and the food is always vegetarian in this philosophy. It's always vegetarian. So when you're preparing this vegetarian food, in your mind, rather than thinking about like, oh, this is going to be so enjoyable for me, I can't wait to taste this spice or whatever, the kind of thoughts we have when we're cooking a delicious meal, right? You dovetail those thoughts into thinking like, oh, I cannot wait for the Lord to enjoy this meal. So you make the meal as an offering to the divine. So like, as you're preparing it, you're envisioning giving it to God, giving it to Goddess. And like, we even go to the extent of having a plate that's only for the divine. It's like a beautiful silver plate, and we put the food on this silver plate, we arrange it ever so nicely, and we put the sweets and things like this that the Lord will enjoy, and then we offer this plate to the divine, and then and you can even take it a step further, and you can sit there, and your meditation can be envisioning the Lord eating it bite by bite and savoring all of it, right? So through that consciousness, you've just made this as an offering to God, completely selflessly. This is for God. And then you take the remnants, and then this is what is eaten by the devotees, by people who are practicing this philosophy. We eat spiritual food. And what happens is, whenever you put it through this process, it's like putting it through meditation. It's like putting your food through meditation. It infuses the food with this divine energy, like how I was like talking about earlier, how we chant these mantras to infuse ourselves with these divine energy, right? We chant these mantras to invoke these positive divinities into our beings. That's what we're doing with the food too. We're doing this meditation while we're preparing the food to infuse the food with that Shakti, to infuse it with the love of the divine, and then we serve it out to people. you know. So that's why every time you go to an ashram or a temple, you know, they're going to be serving food after their programs, you know, because it's literally what brings you to realizations, you know, and it's a slow, gradual process. At first, you're just eating this food like, wow, this is really delicious, and you're chanting this mantra like, hey, this is a catchy tune, and before you know it, it's dramatically affecting your consciousness.
I'm sorry to interrupt you. Did you know that there is a whole course? Like, there's a whole segment of a course, a nutrition course that I took that was literally on the fact of, like, it was like slow eating, taking awareness of what you were eating, to take in the taste, the texture, the smell, to like slowly digest, slowly break it apart in your mouth, like things like that. In that sense of the definition meditation, that would be a sense or a way of meditation. So it's kind of funny how in that same course in that same chapter, it mentions of the nutrition course that I took, it mentions that you become, like, psychologically, you are more open to receiving more of the flavors, more of the nutrients, that it feeds your body. You feel it more. You can actually sense the food passing, like, into your stomach, and then how your body feels afterwards, either energized or if it's like a not so great food, like one that is like full of, you know, unhealthy saturated fats, like you would feel it in your body. And so there's teachings about this, and that's what I find that's very, very I want to say ironic or funny in a way, because it's out there. Because it's out there. The knowledge is out there, and it's also linked, and it coincides with what you're talking about as far as, you know, you're just putting an extra, you know, you see it in a spiritual sense, and doing that in the worldly sense, in the course that I took, is still in a spiritual sense. It's still the same thing, and I think that's funny that it's there. Right. But people don't understand or receive that it's spiritual.
Yeah, it is. And I mean, essentially, all of our knowledge that we have comes from this ancient knowledge. You know, it's all residuals. You know, like all of this practice that I'm referring to you is older than 10,000 years. But if you're looking at it from like, oh, I only believe what scientists say, then it's 10,000 years old. You know, like it's at least 10,000 years old if you're looking at it from a material standpoint. But if you're looking at it from a transcendental standpoint, it's, you know, timeless. But my point is, this knowledge has existed since the dawning of humanity and has been hidden in the language of Sanskrit for so long. And it wasn't until the great saint A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada brought this philosophy to the United States and to the entire Western world, for that matter, like pretty much everywhere outside of the East, he brought this information to. He translated all of these sacred texts into English for us, and he was the very first person to do that from a devotional point of view. You know, like some other Western philosophies, Westerner like philosophers had like. And scholars had like translated this Sanskrit, but they were translating it from like a mythological point of view, or from like, you know, an esoteric point of view. You know, and our philosophy, it's not esoteric and it's not mythological. You know, it's a real personal belief system. Like it's like, you know, we really believe that we, you know, can have a relationship with God. That's why we give God His own plate. That's why we prep this all out the same way you would treat a guest who came to your house, right? A guest comes to your house, you would make them a plate with a nice spread, you'd set it down in front of them, you would let them take their time eating, you wouldn't rush them, you know? It's just these same ways that we treat each other, you know?
Yes,
the same way that we serve each other, that's the way that we're serving the divine, you know? And when it comes to like being conscious about eating and all these things, the process of making prasad is just kind of taking it a step further. You know, it's like really offering it up to something higher than yourself. You know.
Okay, I just want to let you guys know that it's almost about that time where the podcast is about to end. Before we end it, though, I do want to ask you, who were you before all of this? Like, I really want to know that side.
I mean, I was a musician. I was an entrepreneur. I owned a couple of businesses. I'm fairly young. I'm 25 years old, but I've lived kind of a fast life. I was like a world traveler. Just these different things. I was very fortunate to have a lot of experiences that brought me to a spiritual state of being. Like, I experienced an abundance of wealth, of monetary wealth. I experienced, like a lot of different things that society says, like, will make you satiated. I've experienced good relationships. I've experienced having plenty of money and the nice cars and the amount of abundance to be able to like travel around the world. And I've experienced those things, and ultimately, the biggest realization I had from experiencing all of that material wealth and material prosperity and abundance is that none of it is permanently satisfying.
Mm-hmm.
It's we're all under that state of illusion. Like, oh, once I have this material thing, then I'll be happy.
Mm-hmm.
And that goes for everything. That goes for your relationships. Like, once I find love, I'll be permanently happy. Or once I find the right person. Or once I have this amount of money and have this nice house and this nice car, and I don't have to ask my parents for money or whatever it is. Then I'll be happy. But from my own realization was like, no, like all of those things were just temporarily pleasing. And and through those experiences, that's what inspired me to look for something outside of myself, and it was hard. I was a skeptic. I was like very skeptical when it came to spiritual stuff. Like, I was an atheist for a majority of my life, and it's a long story. I had a series of awakenings, but ultimately what matters is that, now, like, I am so grateful for all those experiences, like even though they may have seemed like hard or difficult at the time, ultimately it was all part of the divine's plan to bring me to a state of being where I could actually pursue happiness in a long-lasting way,
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's wonderful. Thank you for sharing that.
That's really beautiful.
Just before we top it off, can I ask you, is there anything you would want to say to someone who may be experiencing something similar to you?
Yeah, I would just say, just start chanting. Like the names of God and Goddess are very powerful names. And this doesn't just have to be Hare Krishna. This could be, saying Jesus' name or Yeshua or the Buddha or Allah. There's all of these names cover they carry a very transcendental sound vibration.
They do,
and I would say,
yeah.
And I would say the very first step to self-realization would be to develop a personal feeling with what those names are. Like just chant them and feel it. Make it a part of your practice. Like, if you have a morning routine, if you have a morning practice, just take a few minutes every day just to say a mantra that has holy names in it, that is something that makes you feel something in you,
Mm-hmm.
And it gets deeper, like there's a science behind all of these mantras in Sanskrit have different outcomes and different energies that they attract. So, like, you can get really technical into it, but if you just simply say Krishna, if you just simply say Allah, if you just simply say Yeshua, Jesus, if you just simply say these names, then you are literally invoking that energy, like you hear like yes.
It's so funny. I want to know your opinion on this because I believe it was yesterday, I sort of like had this like intuitive feeling to chant my own name, as if I was calling out to my heart chakra, and to come out of its like its darkness. And I don't know, I just I was chanting my own name, and I never chant. I'm like, I'm against that. I think that's a little out there, but I don't know, I was in this state of mind where I just was allowing myself, I was allowing my spirit to be moved where it needed to be moved, and I started chanting my own name, as if I was calling to myself, as if I was like bringing comfort to myself, as if I was showing love to myself. And I just want to know what your thoughts are on that.
Well, it's really interesting that you said that, like, while you were chanting your own name, you could really feel it, like, going towards your heart chakra, right? Because in our philosophy, there's something called Param Atma, which is the soul which is like the essence of the divine that lives in your heart. So and that's in all beings' hearts, you know? So one of the ways of serving God is by serving your fellow humanity, and also by serving yourself, by being kind and loving and forgiving to yourself and alleviating the stress off your body or whatever. That is purifying your body temple, which is ultimately making a better home for God and Goddess living in your heart, you know? So, I mean, if it's potent for you to show yourself self-love, I mean, who could you know, possibly say that's a bad thing, to show yourself self-love, you know? And ultimately, if you loving yourself, you know, then that's the first step to so many things, you know, loving yourself. But, you know, loving yourself, if that helps you develop a love for that divine energy that's like resting inside you, then I think that's a great thing, you know?
Thank you. Okay.
Yeah.
Is there anything, Andrew, do you want to ask him? Because we're about to end the podcast.
No, Jivananda, is there anything that you would like to say lastly for people who are very curious or interested in knowing more about, can you state the name of your following again?
Of the what?
Of your belief, state of mind system.
Oh, well, okay, so it's technically known
Krishna
as
Yoga?
It's technically known as Gaudiya Vaishnavism. That is like the term from the East, but in the West, people usually just call people who follow this philosophy Hare Krishnas. That's what people call in the West. But we ourselves, we don't consider ourselves these things, because these are like identifications, you know, we're just spirit souls. But you know, there's like a lot of organizations around the Hare Krishnas, you know, and ultimately, like, you don't have to be a part of any of these organizations to experience this, you know? This is a personal belief system, you know? So, like, and you got to keep in mind, in all philosophies, you know, there's, like, you know, some people who've taken it and twisted this way or that way, blah, 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 blah. Ultimately, what matters is your personal relationship with the divine, and developing that relationship and really exploring it. And it's something that will evolve throughout your whole life. Your relationship with the divine will constantly keep changing. I mean, simply, like, in a nutshell, closing statement, I would say, and this is a quote from A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, His Divine Grace: simply chant the names of God and Goddess, and your life will be sublime.
Well, thank you for that. Thank you so much for being able to talk to us today. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your words. I do really appreciate it.
It really was such a pleasure to pick your mind about all of this. Thank you so much.
Yeah, of course. And I'd love to come back on if you ever want me on again. I love talking about this stuff. I could go on for another couple hours if you had.
Yeah.
For sure. We probably could too.
All right.
It's a really lovely podcast. Thank you guys for holding the space and, you know, helping to inspire people. It's a really beautiful thing. It's a wonderful service that you're doing for everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That really means a lot. That's so funny that you said that, because today we just had someone.
Yes, such a beautiful message from somebody who really resonated with one of our episodes. And it really touched us. Like,
Angie almost cried. She was like, it was a whole paragraph of just how thankful that person was. And
I looked at Vicky and I was like, we touched her soul, Vicky. I had to give her a hug. I was like, we did it. I don't even care. I don't even care if we reach anybody else. We reached one.
Yeah, that's so funny.
The first of many, right?
Yes,
Yeah,
exactly. But thank you so much, Jivananda, for taking this crystal walk with us. Had to throw that out there.
Yes, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much.
All right, I'm gonna be stopping the podcast now.